Okay, Zorgamazoo. We're on chapter 16, but remember in 14 and 15, Katrina Cottrell figured out that there was the control box for all the locks over a ways away, and she saw that ogre had a glass eye. And then remember, she got that Cyril the Slinger, Zip Zorgle de Young, and he's old, but he threw it and he hit it, and then it fell. It went crunch, and then all the doors popped open, and also his eye broke. But at least he got out of the cage. So that's where they are. But remember, right at the end, everybody didn't notice that those machine things, those alligator spiderish things, were coming in the dark. So here we go. A furious fray. "Look there," said a sphinx, for she could make out the darkness nearby. It was moving about. At first only shadows, then suddenly claws, then bellies and wings, and finally jaws. "They're back," Winnie blubbered. "I guess this is it. You'll excuse me, of course, if I whimper a bit." It was hard to blame Winnie for being upset when the Octomobots were closing their net. They surrounded their prey like a poisonous moat or a noose as it narrows and strangles a throat. Everyone cowered, resigned to their fate, to be swallowed again, like some fisherman's bait. A terrible silence pervaded the air, the silence of terror, the hush of despair. It was Morty himself who ended the hush. He wormed his way in through the huddle and crush. He was thinking, you see, of Katrina Cottrell. If she could be brave, maybe he could as well. He came to the core of that cowering crowd. He stood on his tiptoes. He shouted aloud, "Now sometimes you lose and sometimes you win, but my pop always told me you never give in." And if he were here now, I know what he'd say. "Morty, my son, when you're caught in a fray, or your travels are tough and the going gets rough, or you're up to your neck in the slippery stuff, or say some old robots are on the attack, then I tell you, my son, you start fighting back." Hearing this improvised rallying cry, the creatures of Earth decided to try. They'd work all together. They'd give it their all, like a team on the field playing Zorgly ball. They stood all together in steely suspense. Their eyes were unblinking. Their muscles were tense. Morty looked round with an arch of his brow. "That's it," he said softly. "Just wait for it now. Just wait and we'll take them, I think, by surprise. Just wait till you make out the whites of their eyes." But the Octomobots, they were smarter than that, and one of them lunged right off the bat. It moved blindingly quick, but be that as it may, the behemoth was there, and he stepped in its way. He snatched up its tentacles, 6 in a fist, and he hefted it up with the heave of and a twist. So the Octomobot, its whole body and all, went sailing away and smashed on the wall. The behemoth was stunned. He was rather impressed. "I don't know my own strength," he sincerely confessed. "All right," Morty cried, "let's give 'em what for." That was only the first. There's a great many more. But if we stick together like paper and glue, then I think we can take them, I honestly do. And so all at once a great battle began. You might say the hooey was hitting the fan. The battle went crashing all over the place between creatures of Earth and the creatures from space. The giants galumphed with a biff and a buff, while the punches of pixies went piffle and puff. The griffins whose wings had been formerly pinned soared up in the air like hawks in the wind. They snatched up the arms of the Octomobots, and looping in circles, they tied them in knots. Even the tiniest creatures of all, the fairies and imps, who were awfully small, they too waded into the furious fray and were helping to fight in their miniature way. On the robots they leapt with the greatest of care, going deep underneath all the layers of hair. They went under the arms where they tickled the pits, so the robots were reeling in snickering fits. Soon the Octomobots were battered and bruised, looking messy, disheveled, and rather confused. But still they fought on. They were stubborn and stout. They continued to bully their muscles about, thrashing and flailing their pinchers and claws, gnashing and grinding their slavering jaws. So the battle raged on for the Octomobots, against dragons and manticores covered with spots, against sphinx and griffins and ogres and elves, all struggling together, defending themselves. It was then that Katrina was struck with a thought of a way they could maybe avoid being caught. "Morty," she bellowed, "you stay here and fight. I'm going off now to set everything right." "But how?" Morty wondered. "I don't understand. And where are you going? What have you planned?" But Katrina had vanished without leaving a trace. In the spot where she'd been, there was nothing but space. "Not again," Morty thought as he muttered a sigh while dodging a tentacle slithering by. Katrina was smart, that much was true, but honestly, what could she possibly do? There was only one person who saw where she went. He was stooping and crooked and thoroughly bent, and his aging, decrepit, cantankerous guy had ironically seen her with only one eye. Watching her vanish, having heard what she said, he winked with that vacuous hole in his head. "Good luck," said the ogre with a weak little wave. "You're probably nuts, but you're certainly brave." Dawn, dawn, dawn. Chapter 17. Inside the machine. So there she is right there. Okay, let's see what happens. I imagine, of course, you're eager to know, where was Katrina? Where did she go? You're wondering where and you're wondering how. Wait 6 little words and I'll tell you right now. Looking behind her, Katrina had seen a hatch in the hoarder of boredom machine. She opened it up with the tip of her shoe and clambered inside, then vanished from view. Down through a passage she quietly sneaked, while in every direction machinery creaked. The farther she went, the passages shrank. The workings grew cluttered and dingy and dank. But still she pressed on, going all in between the wires and tubes making up the machine. She finally came to the end of the road, to the nexus where all the machinery flowed. There she encountered a mountainous sphere, an incredible orb that was perfectly clear. It rose from the floor like a planet of glass. It was filled with an almost invisible gas. The gas had the color of moldering cream, and Katrina knew then this was tedium steam. She took a step forward, approaching the sphere. It loomed overhead, looking bleak and austere. She spotted 2 wires, 2 cables, 2 cords that sprung from the floor and went curling towards the base of the sphere and its silvery glass, where they linked to the bottom with fittings of brass. Seeing them there, something clicked in her mind as she looked at the way the machine was designed. Those wires, she thought, they are the way of solving our problems and saving the day. She took off her bag, slipping out of the straps. She opened it slowly, unzipping the flaps. Inside was a clutter of jumbled array of all she'd collected since running away. The spring that had come from the grandfather clock, the one she had used to jimmy the lock, some strips of the sheet that had flapped like a cape when she leapt from her window to make her escape. There was also a knife she had grabbed in a flash from the hair of that bully, Selena the Slash. There were pebbles and stones from the tunnel of hush she had caught when they fell in that plummeting crush. She had even acquired some slippery slime, the oiliest, goopiest, greasiest grime, It had come from the tongue of the Octomobot and clung to her bag like a dollop of snot. Using the knife from Selena the Slash, she proceeded to sever, to mangle, and gnash. Then with the pebbles and some of the rocks, she scraped and she hammered with scratches and knots. The spring, it was twisted and given a flip, so its coil became more of a fastening clip. With all of these items, she fiddled around, using all of the various things she had found. At last, when her curious work was complete, she tied it all off with the tatters of sheet, and sealed it like glue with the gunk that had hung from the Graylian robot's mechanical tongue. Then she stood back, her eyes going wide. Something peculiar was starting inside. At the heart of that shimmering luminous sphere, a new kind of vapor began to appear. It started quite slow, at first just a puff from one of the tubes that was pumping the stuff. A new kind of gas was replacing the old, and the new stuff, in truth, was a sight to behold. Inside of the glass, to Katrina's surprise, was a music, it seemed, you could hear with your eyes. Meanwhile, outside of the boredom machine, the battle was growing ferocious and mean. The creatures of Earth, the Zorgals and all, were locked in a brazen and barbarous brawl. There was hair being wrangled, eyes being poked, toes being twisted, and throats being choked. Morty and Winnie were taking their lumps. The sphinxes and griffins were covered with bumps. The dragons, the yetis, the phoenixes too, the pixies and fawns, and the gilly-galoo were lost in a fracas of wallops and bunks, of punches and pummels and clobbers and clunks. But in spite of their vow that they never would quit, and in spite of their bravery, gumption, and grit, they were starting to tire, losing their hopes, like a boxer pinned down, his back on the ropes. The Octomobots, they too could surmise that the ominous gleam in their ominous eyes, that the battle was finally taking its toll, and now was their moment for taking control. So half of them suddenly stood in a row, like dancers in some sort of musical show. They spread out their tentacles, weaving them all, with the others beside them, creating a wall. Then they came forward, inch after inch, closing their prey in a sinister pinch. So Marty and Winnie and all of the rest were hemmed in a corner, compacted, compressed. They were forced in a clumsy, uncomfortable pose, being elbow to elbow, to shoulder to nose, and being so crowded, so awkwardly crammed, they couldn't fight back. They were thoroughly jammed. Then the Octomobots, who were still in the air, could pluck up their prey without even a care. In this way, the creatures were quickly recaught, in spite of how bravely their battle was fought. The behemoth at last was the only one left, but even with all his incredible heft, he couldn't fight back. His chances were slim. There were simply too many, even for him. So alas, my good reader, the battle was done, and the Octomobots had clumsily won. The creatures of Earth, I'm sorry to say, were locked up again without any delay. The bolts were refastened, the cages refilled, and Morty, of course, wasn't terribly thrilled. Once more he was hunched on the floor of his cell and wondering, where was Katrina Cottrell? Understandably, Morty was all in a huff. Adventures, he grumbled. Enough is enough. Then the entranceway door, it opened up wide, and Dulbert came wearily strolling inside. He stood for a moment, one hand on his hip, the other one thoroughly tapping his lip. He took a step forward and finally spoke. So you tried to escape. Oh, please, what a joke. There is no way to leave here. Or didn't you know? We're up on the moon. There's nowhere to go. He's right, Morty thought, feeling thoroughly beset by a feeling of utter defeat. He puffed out a rather disheartened sigh, while Winnie, as usual, started to cry. But just as she started to sob in her cell, her tears were cut short by the toll of a bell. It resounded like thunder. It rang and it rang. It chimed with a terrible, desperate clang. Hearing it, Dulbert was suddenly tense. The alarms, he exclaimed. That doesn't make sense. He examined his cages, dismayed and distraught. There's one of them missing, he suddenly thought. To Morty he said, "Hey, you with the fur, that girl who came with you, what happened to her?" He went to his bank of surveillance displays showing dungeons and cells in an intricate maze. He let out a shriek as he peered at the screen. "Holy gazookas! Not inside the machine!" He stabbed at some buttons, he pushed quite a few, and the hoarder of boredom split open in two, revealing Katrina, who cowered inside. She had nowhere to go, she had nowhere to hide. But amid all those wires and Graylian gear, all that anyone saw was the luminous sphere. You see, my good reader, that circle of glass was filling with billows of colorful gas. Where once it was filled with the nebulous gray, the tedium steam was all washing away. It was being replaced with the colorful threads of a gas made of glittering yellows and reds. And not only those, but a great many more colors than anyone thought of before. There was olive and orange and lavender too. There was purple and puce and cerulean blue. There was violet, vermilion, viridin green. More colors, I'd say, than you've ever seen. They were blindingly bright, seeming never to cease. There was burgundy, lilac, and even cerise, and mingling with others like aquamarine, swirling and whirling inside the machine. Delbert just stood there in shock and dismay. He was utterly stunned, didn't know what to say. He whimpered and waggled his Graylian head. "You didn't," he cried. "You couldn't," he said. "You're wrong," said Katrina. "I certainly could. I fixed it all up. I fixed it up good." "Fixed it? You wrecked it. How incredibly mean. You've demolished my hoarder of boredom machine." "Not at all," said Katrina, shaking her head. "It's not wrecked. It's not broken. It's better instead." "You rascal," said Delbert. "You're lying to me." He lowered his voice in a pitiful plea. "Listen, Katrina," he said with a sigh. "Without boredom for fuel, my planet will die." "Wait," said Katrina. "See, this is my hunch. This new kind of gas packs a powerful punch." Delbert was doubtful. He wasn't convinced. He gaped at the colors. He grimaced and winced. Katrina, just look at that puff after puff. It's disgusting. What is it, this colorful stuff? Katrina just smiled, and turning around, she admired the wonderful substance she found. She folded her arms, looking up at the glass. "I think that I'll call it enchantium gas." Dun, dun, dun. Enchantium gas.